For those that you are joining, this is a webinar event which is due to last until 11 o'clock. It is being hosted by Waterfront Conference Company, and it is on the subject matter of scaling up hydrogen in the UK and specifically reaching the 10 gigawatts of hydrogen production by 2030. We have 3 speakers on the panel today who are experts within this field. This webinar is being recorded. All participants will receive a recording pretty soon after the event, if not by the end of the week. So if you do end up having to drop off or can't hear us properly, then obviously everybody that's joined today will get a copy of the webinar afterwards. The way that this is going to work today is that we are going to do the speakers are each going to have in turn a period of time to discuss the webinar subject today, and then we will move to questions and answers afterwards. Just so you are aware, we are doing this via the question and answer section of the Zoom rather than the chat, as we can't use both. So please, as you think of questions, please put questions into the question and answer section. If possible, please write at least your name on there, and if we don't end up answering all of the questions by the end of the webinar, then we will do our best to try and get those answered by the at some point after the event. So just to remind everybody, we are recording this, and the webinar will be available after the webinar has finished or soon after. So just to start off with introductions, first of all, welcome everybody for coming along. We have this subject obviously is quite relevant at the moment. We've had an awful lot of government related announcements just before the Christmas break, where specifically a lot of the hydrogen projects that are gearing up for this 10 gigawatts by 2030, with the hydrogen allocation round 1 being announced for 11 successful applicants on that, and also the opening of the second allocation round, which is having to make up the up to the 1 gigawatt that was required. So the purpose of this webinar is hoping to consider progress with accelerating the consenting process to reduce costs to developers, funding future infrastructure, and how to draw investment into the sector, and also upskilling the industry to deliver future hydrogen ambitions. And for the purpose of this webinar, I first of all will introduce myself. My name is Sarah Bartle. I work as the Green Gas and Hydrogen Policy Lead for the REA, which is a trade association of renewable energy and clean technology. Obviously, my focus has been dealt with a lot with the hydrogen, and there's been an awful lot that's been happening over the last year within that. We are also very lucky to have been joined by 3 experts within the field. We have Robert Garden of Council in CMS, who is part of the planning team based in London, with specialisms in energy and infrastructure projects. Having joined in 2010, he has particular experience in consenting energy projects, particular specialism in the promotion of development consent orders and compulsory purchase orders, and has been currently advising on the promotion of a number of hydrogen projects, and advising on the policy on hydrogen set out in the national policy statements. As well as that, we have Rajesh Kedia, who's the director of the UK Infrastructure Bank. He's had 2 decades worth of experience working in complex financial solutions in the public and private sector. He is currently director at the UK Infrastructure Bank, where his responsibility is to cover hydrogen and nuclear sector. So very apt to have him on at the moment. He has spent a year working with the HM Treasury to set up the bank, and previously working with UK government investments, advising and leading negotiations on behalf of the UK government. And finally, we will have we will hear from Ian Buchanan, who's the Project Development Manager of RES. He's a green technologist with over 10 years experience in the renewable industry and is the development project managing RES's green hydrogen projects. He has a background working with manufacturing industries, which provided him with insight into production processes, and he brings his experience of a range of renewable technologies to drive projects through the planning and consenting process. So we will start by giving each in turn the opportunity to speak, and we are going to start with Rob Garden, from CMS to start.
Thanks, Eric. Good morning, everyone. So as I said, I'm with CMS. We're legal advisors and advising on a number of hydrogen projects across the kind of full chain, so production, pipelines, and storage. And today I'm just going to talk through essentially accelerating the consenting process for hydrogen and looking at some of the consenting barriers that are still there for hydrogen projects. And I think when the government kind of started focusing on hydrogen, and in particular the hydrogen strategy in 2021, one of the key things they identified early was that the planning process isn't necessarily set up with hydrogen in mind. And one of the deliverables for that 10 gigawatt capacity that they have identified is planning and permitting regime in place by the end of 2024. And so I suspect that means very end of 2024, given where we are now. One of the papers that came out in December 23 was the government's research findings on planning barriers, and that identifies kind of a number of constraints and issues that the government are looking to address. So I'll touch on some of those today, but I thought before we get into that, it's worth considering what the current consenting position is for hydrogen projects, and looking firstly at production. And the starting point is that will need to be consented through Town and Country Planning Act process with the local planning authority. Whilst there is a nationally significant infrastructure planning regime in place, at present there is no category that applies specifically to hydrogen production. So if you have a project that you're promoting and you want to take through the DCO regime, which a number of people may want to do given the benefits that brings in terms of the Secretary of State being the decision maker, and also the ability to bring in things like compulsory purchase powers, then at present there's no direct route into the Planning Act 2008. Now there are two potential exceptions to that. The first is to classify a co-located hydrogen project as associated development, but I think that brings challenges given the current way the regime is set up, because to be associated development you need to be subordinate, and hydrogen production is often a kind of means in itself, so may not satisfy that test. But the second route into the DCO regime, which people are starting to take, is the use of what's known as a Section 35 direction. And that is essentially an application where you ask the Secretary of State to direct that your project is nationally significant. And there have been a number of hydrogen production projects which have been directed into the nationally significant infrastructure space that way, of varying scale. So the Corey decarbonisation project received a direction. That's a kind of 50 megawatt production scheme. At the other end of the scale, there's kind of a H2T side, which has potentially a 1.2 gigawatt production facility, again, directed into the NSIP regime. So I think that might be an area that we see some change in, and potentially move towards a hydrogen production classification. And one of the reasons for that, and I'll touch on some of the barriers, but is the time that it can take to consent a project through town and country planning, given local planning authorities' knowledge of hydrogen projects. And last week there was the positive news that the scheme as part of the HyNet project through ESSA's project in the Northwest had planning consent, but that's been in the planning process now for kind of over 2.5 years. And so it does take some time to get through even at a local level. Alongside that, you've obviously got hydrogen pipelines and hydrogen storage. Now these do both have classifications of nationally significant infrastructure where projects can fall into the DCO regime. And also you still have the ability to seek a Section 35 direction. And again, projects have done that previously. So the HyNet hydrogen pipeline has gone into to consent that way. But ultimately, there are a range of different ways in which projects can be consented. And I think one of the things the government may look to do is to kind of streamline that and make it clearer as to how to consent projects. In terms of some of the key barriers that are still out there and that the government's work will probably need to address. There are 6 items that I wanted to talk through today. The first we'll touch on later as well, but it is just skills and knowledge, and particularly when you're consenting projects at a local planning authority level. This is a new technology. Not many local authorities will have come across it, and it may be when you're going in with a project that you're the first one through the door with the local planning authority. So there's a need to kind of upskill at a local level there to ensure authorities understand the nature of the project. And the risk without that is effectively a risk of delay or a risk of planning refusal and having to appeal. But I think from promoters' side, there's also work that can be done there. And when you're submitting planning applications, two key documents that I think you'll need to produce a clear needs case, so demonstrating why you need your hydrogen project, why here and why now, and also a clear benefits case. And one of the other things I'll touch on shortly is policy. But local authorities may not necessarily understand the benefits of the project, whether it's decarbonising a certain industrial user within the area, whether it's supply for transport, whatever the justification for a project may be, clearly setting that out. I think there are kind of other technologies that have emerged in the energy sector over the past 10 years. You think of battery storage, where there have been a lot of refusals, a lot of planning appeals, and I think a lot of that stems to not having that needs case and benefits position set out clearly. Linked to that is consultees, and again, there's a lack of kind of key guidance from consultees on a lot of the material issues, particularly from some bodies like the Health and Safety Executive. So that linked with local planning authority potentially leaning more heavily on consultees is an area where I think we'll need further guidance to emerge, and ultimately to provide support for planning authorities. But again, as project promoters, a key recommendation really is to engage early with these consultees to ensure that they can provide the input needed. A real area where I think there still needs to be further work is policy. We've got the national planning policy statements at a national level that apply to nationally significant infrastructure projects. And since they first came out in draft in 2021, they've kind of moved on and now present a really positive authorities can rely on in terms of planning policy. Technology, you're not going to have local development plans that provide policy for hydrogen in a number of cases. So I think that's an area where there's further work still needed from government. The planning status, so I talked at the beginning there around the different potential ways that you can consent projects, and that differs across jurisdictions, and there are some more complications as you kind of get into the Scottish regime, potentially around co-locating, particularly with Section 36 consents. And ultimately, that's something that leads to uncertainty and delay. So I suspect that's something we'll see the government promote through sort of legislative change. Linked to that is also just the regulatory position. If you take an electricity project or an energy generator, they have the potential to secure a generation license, which brings with it a suite of powers, permitted development rights, compulsory purchase powers potentially, and also powers under the New Roads and Streetworks Act that currently doesn't apply to hydrogen production. It may apply to gas transporters who are operating pipelines, but not necessarily to production. And I think that's something that, again, we're likely to see some form of regulatory change come through from the government. And then the final issue is more of a practical one, but it's one that comes up across kind of every project we're involved in, which is dealing with water supply as part of hydrogen projects. And again, perceived impact on water resources, both from local planning authorities, from consultees, and increasingly from the public, who, when they look into hydrogen projects, see that as something that needs to be addressed. And again, I think that's an area where further guidance and potentially more granular assessment at a regional or a local level needs to be undertaken. And from a project promoter perspective, it's a really important factor to take into account in site selection and to assess in environmental impact assessment. So something that needs to be kind of borne in mind through everything that you're doing as project promoters, particularly when you think about the local planning authorities may not have been through the process previously. So in terms of how we accelerate the consenting process, or how we address some of those barriers. As I said at the top, the hydrogen strategy recognises the need for planning and permitting regimes to change, and for those to be in place by the end of this year. And the government's recent research again recognises the need for that by the end of 2024. So I think things we'll see come through will be particularly more guidance for local planning authorities, potentially planning policy framework updates to support the 10 gigawatt ambition that's in the national policy statement. But importantly, one of the other things that will be developed by the future systems operator is a strategic spatial energy plan, and that follows off the back of the Windsor report in the electricity industry, which recommended that there was a kind of spatial plan for transmission infrastructure. And that the hydrogen research that the government published in December 23 expressly recognises that they expect that to also cover hydrogen infrastructure, which I think is really important in terms of being proactive and perhaps learning some of the lessons of the last few years from other sectors. In the DCO space, which a lot of these projects will fall into, so the nationally significant infrastructure space, that is a process that is fairly timely and fairly costly, but government have been doing a lot of work over the last 2 years to expedite the planning process there. And at the moment there is a pilot program in place, which a number of projects are taking part in to see how projects can be accelerated. And that is due to be rolled out in spring 24 this year with changes to regulation and guidance. And again, I think projects hopefully will be able to benefit from the pilot program, from some of the changes that are due to be introduced in the next few months, and for faster consenting processes to be in place. So I think to kind of summarise where we are, there are a number of barriers to the delivery of hydrogen projects. They're not necessarily unique. I think what we'll see from the government is probably evolution and not revolution in terms of how the planning process progresses to deal with these projects. Thanks, Sarah. I'll pass back to you.
Okay, thank you, Rob, for that. That was really useful. I think in terms of it, the government obviously aware very much that there are planning issues, and I think it goes across the board for my sector within biomethane as well, the problems that exist with planning and permits. Hence, they've actually brought out their hydrogen projects planning barriers and solutions research findings report at the end of December as well, which is useful. But I think we'll obviously now move on to Rajesh, who's got experience of the investment side of the infrastructure or projects in terms of investment as part of his role in the investment infrastructure bank, and obviously have read your strategy update green hydrogen report in September, which was really useful and covers the breadth of information. So I'd highly recommend people also try and get onto the site and try and find that document as well, which is really useful. But I will now hand over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. Just way of an introduction, I think it's just worth setting out a little bit about who UK Infrastructure Bank is and what our purpose is. And then I'll talk a little bit about our green hydrogen strategy also in that context. So UK Infrastructure Bank was set up 2.5 years back by the current Prime Minister, then Chancellor. We've been capitalized with £22 billion of public sector capital. We've got two critical missions, which is basically to help transition UK economy into net zero economy by 2050. And the other mission that we've got is the local and regional economic growth. We've got 5 priority sector areas: clean energy, transport, digital, water and waste sector. And within that vertical, we've identified some key subsectors, and hydrogen is one of the key sectors for us. I think the best way to describe us is that we're trying to help facilitate government's policy ambition and amplify those policy ambitions. And I'll come back to hydrogen in a minute. But really what that means is that whatever the policy direction of government is in terms of its net zero ambitions, we want to support projects reach financing and reach government policy ambition and objectives in that way. And what we've learned in the last 2.5 years, we've committed about 2.5 billion of capital, worked alongside with co-investors, project sponsors, and with every pound of investment, we've multiplied private sector capital alongside our capital. And really, in the last 2.5 years, what we've learned is that we're not here to compete with private sector, but actually work alongside with private sector to help raise private capital. Particularly without our involvement, that simply wouldn't have been possible. Given our size, we can move fast. We can think about risk different to private sector. We've got triple bottom line, which is basically to achieve our policy objectives, crowd in private capital, and to achieve financial return. We've also got flexibility when it comes to financing structures. So unlike other banks or commercial investors, we're quite flexible to think about equity, debt, or hybrid solutions, or indeed kind of think about providing guarantee to a senior debt financing or also. So we are a government-backed policy bank, so our presence also helps instill confidence with investors to invest in projects, and that's why people have welcomed us to work with us. So I think if there's a piece of infrastructure where the market is nervous because of policy risk, market capacity, first of a kind challenge, or about scale, that's where our presence in the deal comes and becomes really important for us. We headquartered in Leeds. We are 200 plus staff in the bank, so fully functioning and operational bank, and building relationships and connections to really partner with sponsors and investors to get the financing going. On the hydrogen space, we published our strategy in September last year, and we are very aware of the 10 gigawatt policy aim that government has got. We are working with, as you may be aware, the hydrogen allocation round 1 shortlisted projects and allocated the hydrogen business model support to projects. We are looking to support some of those projects to reach financing, final investment decisions, but also looking forward to the next hydrogen allocation round 2, where we think the aspirations are higher than the hydrogen allocation round 1. We think the financing challenge there could be about 1.5 to 2 billion of capital needed. We are working and in discussions with lots of those projects who are thinking about applying in HAR2 round, and see how we can support with our financing where the gaps might be. But really, that 10 gigawatt policy goal is very much in sight for us, and we've been involved in a number of discussions to help support financing, particularly for large projects that are looking to get government business model support. We see potentially 3 challenges as such when it comes to barriers to private capital in the hydrogen sector. The first one is the demand side, which is likely to be low due to the investment required and the technology transition that the off-takers need to take. There is a hesitation, I suppose, to commit to a long-term off-take arrangements when it comes to demand, particularly given the new fuel switch that some of the off-takers need to make and the cost involved. The second aspect is that there is a limited reliability and performance data on electrolyzers, and also the supply chain is constrained. We are very, very aware that there's a constrained capacity when it comes to electrolyzer production in the market. Third, but not least, is there is limited track record for investors to get confidence to invest large sums of capital in this sector. So thinking about those, we are very much working in partnership and in collaboration with investors and project sponsors to really unpack that risk for investor community and see how we can work together to lean in more and consider risk appetite in a different way than the commercial investors would be. Really, that's more on the sort of the production side. The other aspect of hydrogen strategy that we've got is to look at the demand side story. In fact, our first investment that we did in ZeroAvia was very much a demand story on hydrogen. Increasingly, we have been approached by lots of demand-led projects where we are closely evaluating those opportunities. For us, we see that as a journey to support both the production as well as on the demand side project, and really think about hydrogen as a full value chain to support the UK economy. That's all I will say in terms of UK Infrastructure Bank and our green hydrogen strategy. Back to you, Sarah.
Okay, thank you for that, Rajesh. That was really useful in terms of the investment side, and I know the focus, having gone to some recent HAR2 engagement sessions, the involvement of the UK Infrastructure Bank within that actual application process is quite evident. So I think, and it's going to need to be, given the fact that the first ambition for HAR1 was 250 megawatts, it only has achieved 125. So the ambitions for HAR2 is that much more now, rather than the 750. It's increased to make the shortfall within the 1 gigawatt that needs to achieve. So it's going to very much need to scale up in terms of that. But now we're going to move on to Ian Buchanan from RES. I know that you have done, or part of the organisation has done a lot of work recently over in I think it's pronounced Anya over in Sweden, where they've sort of worked very closely in terms of a sort of community-based thing. I think, one of the barriers that has already been listed in terms of planning has been the consultees within the locality and the sort of, so actually that community-based thing is going to be very important, I think, that understanding going forward. So I'm very much looking forward to what you have to say as well. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for the wee introduction there. And welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning, wherever you may be. My name is Ian Buchanan. So as we were introduced earlier, I'm the Development Project Manager at RES's Green Hydrogen team. We have a dedicated green hydrogen team in the UK, which is actually part of our wider HYRO joint venture with Octopus Energy, where we've progressed a number of projects through the system through HAR1 and are working on getting consent for a couple of projects just basically as we speak, which has been fun. So, we're talking this morning about how we're going to, really improve matters and scale up hydrogen in the UK by 2030. 2030, we're in 2024 now, so we're only talking 6 years away. That's not a lot of time. That's not a lot of time at all. And we're sitting here really discussing this whilst in the meantime, in the background, there's a climate emergency. And some of the latest figures say that we're on target for something like a 1.48 degree change in global temperatures. In my book, that's as good as 1.5 degrees. So I don't think it's anything to really cheer about. So there's a hell of a lot of work to do as far as I'm concerned. So how are we going to move things forward really quickly in such a short space of time? When I consider some of the project timescales for some of the more small to medium projects that we've kicked off our hydrogen ambitions with, then, that timescale is really, really very tight. We've submitted some projects into the system, and to be honest, I'm looking at something like for designing and consenting process, 18 months to 2 years would be a very, very quick turnaround in that. You're probably talking about another year to 18 months for procure and construct, and then probably another 6 months for testing and commissioning. So at the very earliest, I can only really see these projects being turned around in 4 years. And that's only for the smaller scale projects that will help individual hard to abate industries like we're targeting meet their carbon reduction targets. That takes us very, very close to that 2030 deadline. And I think it's really only going to scratch the surface of the ambitions we have to reach that 10 gigawatt target and fully tackle climate change. So how are we going to accelerate the consent? That's the key question. I think for a lot of the projects that are going to go forward that are out with, NSIP or the other larger scale systems in Wales and Scotland, is a bit more thought into development zones for planning, zones where there are already other industries and potential off-takers sited nearby, where some of that consenting process could be streamlined with more of a presumption in favour of development. To help actually get there, there's a very much a great need within the planning community at local level as well as national. And I know Rob touched on that earlier. There's an awful lot of education and an awful lot of guidance required to actually upskill the planners and local planning authorities to actually fully understand what we mean by some of these systems. And that goes the same for some of the consultees that they engage with. And I think I've had some direct experience of that to date. Rob touched again on that earlier, and I think it's really, really important that there's a wider education within these and upskilling within these departments. And one of the things I think that's worthwhile, drawing attention to is I was part of a team that co-wrote a Renewable UK document on hydrogen planning. And that's a really useful document for anybody, both as developers and also if you're working in the planning space, to really review, because it gives a very good overview. And that document is on the Renewable UK website, and I'll be happily to help the team provide a link for that afterwards, because it's a useful document. But I think there needs to be an understanding from where we're starting on with some of these projects is very much modular systems are going to be the first ones that that are going into the planning. There'll be other projects much larger, which will be the 50 megawatt, 100 megawatt or gigawatt scale projects. But we've still to see these really come through, and that's a much larger nut to crack. Some of the safety considerations, key safety considerations, will need to be kind of better understood. And I think when you start, it's about disseminating that information to planners and consultees alike, that what we're dealing with is not something that's absolutely totally brand new and that's never been tried before. Much of the technology is tried and tested. It's just that we're putting it in a different location and on a different scale to what people are maybe perhaps more used to. As far as infrastructure, who's going to look after that? What are they going to try and grow? How do we do it? I think this is another area where there does need to be government-funded incentives that help to actually marry up the market demand and the potential producers. We've spoken at conferences and spoken to many different people. Some of the manufacturers have actually come to us and said things like, well, look, I'm really interested in hydrogen, but how can I come and get some? Where can I go to buy it? How can I make sure I'm the right size? For some of the, HAR1 and HAR2 projects, fine, if we are going to develop projects that are going to provide a complete distribution network and effectively be a retailer that you rock up to buy your hydrogen, that's fine. But for a lot of instances, to actually get these projects off the ground, we need to have long-term commitments from off-takers that can provide that. So the larger industries are the guys that can actually sign those agreements. For the smaller companies who may only need minimum quantities of hydrogen every couple of months, then there needs to be a wee bit more focus as to how we can marry that up. And that certainly, I think, needs some government incentives to actually help kickstart that market, and then it will grow. But without that inward investment to get it moving, that's going to take a long, long time to happen naturally. Rajesh has already mentioned about a reluctance to invest in some of this quite expensive kit at this stage. That's why we need something like that to help kickstart that kind of thing, to develop more of a market for both producers and buyers. I think tackling the hard-to-abate industries that are heavy users of fossil fuels is definitely the way forward that we should be going with these. That's an incentive that Hyro, our joint venture company, have taken with some of the customers we're looking at. But I can applaud initiatives from government lately, like the Green Industries Accelerator Fund. That's a fund of 960 million over 5 years, which is aiming to help industries actually, buy the hydrogen-ready kit and other, renewable friendly kit, low carbon kit that will actually help, meet their demands. And that's a really good way of, kickstarting that demand from, the end user market. On top of that, it's also good to see some of the pledges that government have made to improve the grid infrastructure. That is an absolute must if we are to see hydrogen plants located at the point of source where we need to actually either obtain electricity for the grid and be able to supply hydrogen to those who need it in the most efficient way possible. Currently, we've been facing things like delays for up to 5 years for grid. So if government can really make things happen and turn around their ambitions to improve things to happen within closer to 6 months, then that will be a huge step forward. As well as that, there's some of the accelerator funds that have been earmarked. And I think there's something in there for hydrogen that I think the UK as a whole needs to grasp, whatever part of the UK you actually live and work in. There's a long tradition of expertise in engineering and in technology across this country. And we've let wind turbine manufacture be something that passes by. This is certainly an area that we could spend more time and have more effort to make sure that we are not just importing electrolyzers from abroad, but we can actually encourage a manufacturing capacity of electrolyzers for ourselves here in the UK. And I would definitely like to see something like that being put in place within the next few years to help achieve this 10 gigawatt target for us. The wider upskilling programme is something that is I think, a much wider issue all the way across. I've mentioned it a wee bit about in planning, but similarly, the focus on STEM subjects has been well recognised of late. Being able to promote STEM subjects and show young people in education today that, there is a way forward by studying these things, that, you will have a future, career and future plans, for a long time to come by looking at industries like hydrogen and other low carbon industries. And also there could be some really good ways to encourage that with adults who are already, in business or in engineering, to actually help them make a step towards, making a career change. There's been a lot of talk about maybe transitioning from oil and gas into hydrogen and other aspects of renewable energy. But for a lot of people, that is quite a big step. And if they have a relatively successful career in one industry, moving to another needs a couple of incremental steps and a bit of help to get you there. And I know, because I've done that and I have made that career change, and it's not always the easiest thing to undertake. So I think there's more could be done to promote the vast array of jobs that actually are linked to hydrogen and linked to renewables, both in the development side and also behind the scenes that sometimes go unnoticed in data analysis and engineering, and as well as in the actual planning and project development side. That really brings me just to the end of the bits that I really wanted to talk about today, and I hope that provides a bit of food for thought. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Ian. That was really useful as well. And I think all three speakers have covered quite a range and not duplicated themselves too much, obviously talking about the same subject matter. So that's been really great. I think just want to mention to everybody now that obviously we're at the section where if you have any questions, please to send through to us via the questions and answer section of Zoom, as we can't use the chat function in addition to the questions and answers. And obviously we will try and answer that for the duration remaining of this webinar. So I think while we're sort of waiting for sort of any questions to come in, I think from the skills point of view, which as you sort of finished with that, Ian, more recently, I think certainly it's a conversation that's been running across the whole of the renewable sector. It's not just a focus on the skills needed to actually sort of look at the ongoing operational requirements of hydrogen, but very much in the construction side of it, the planning side of it, the permitting side of it. There's currently issues with regards to local authorities having not just members of staff available, which can be an issue as well, but the levels of skills required, because that all slows the process down. And, you know, understandably, somebody that is on a junior level is going to be more hesitant about pushing something through of this scale where there's so little knowledge already, not just sort of nationally, but actually within a locality where that's going to be based. So I think, you know, the moves that are being done by the government to sort of recognise that and hopefully push that through, as well as within the Environment Agency and permitting requirements as well. And I think sort of upskilling in that respect. But it, you know, it's clear to say that it goes right across the board, and so it's easy to sort of try and suggest that we can move from one to the other from oil and gas industries where there are similarities in experience and knowledge, but it goes into, you know, the civil engineering side of it and the construction point of view can cause blockages in terms of getting these achieved within the timescales needed. So I don't know whether anybody I mean, certainly one thing I wanted to mention was that I'm aware of the Hydrogen Skills Alliance, which is now been formed, I think, sort of working sort of with Cogent to try and sort of push through some of the sort of skills required, and certainly apprenticeship side, there seems to be quite a lot of different companies already pushing on that. So I think that's quite a useful area, but it goes to show there's a need for looking even specifically at hydrogen based on the need for scaling up. So I don't know whether anybody has any specific sort of viewpoints on skills sort of across the sector that might be causing problems, and where we sort of maybe need to focus attention on. And anybody wants to come back on that, Ian or Rob, potentially?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you touched on there, so it's just resource availability, and it's something I think we can't get away from as part of the wider government drive on planning to upskill and to bring people in. But it leads on to, I guess, another potential issue which is facing the industry, which is just where these projects are likely to be located. There is already a huge drive for potentially sort of solar development or other developments such as CCS, and you're going to have clusters of projects in certain areas which probably actually put more of a drain on resourcing than has previously been the case. I mean, Lincolnshire is a prime example at the moment where they are inundated with major infrastructure applications, and again, it's an area where hydrogen is likely to be focused within industry in that area. And so I think support that way. And in terms of what the industry can do, it's probably more coordination and more engagement than has been the case previously. So kind of working with other project developers where possible to make sure you are fully coordinating and helping local authorities or consultees, and not putting more of a strain on them.
I think that's a good point you made there, Rob. Actually, you know, engagement and coordination with you know, others, and particularly with, you know, some of the local planning teams, is certainly something that I would see is beneficial, and, you know, has reaped some benefit, you know, from some of the work I've done to date. So I think that's a good shout.
Okay, thanks for that, Ian. I don't know whether you wanted to come in that with that, Rajesh, or are you happy for me to start going through the questions that have started to come through?
Happy with the questions.
Okay, fine. All right, so if we start with the first one then, is there an expectation to support hydrogen production of a smart grid small scale in terms of economy? Don't know whether in terms of anybody in the particular wants to answer that who might have experience. I know that obviously the HAR2 projects are sort of more looking at a minimum of 5 megawatts per project. So, and, you know, even looking, I think some of the part of the conversation was that they even wouldn't look at integrated projects moving into sort of collaborating to actually get to that 5 megawatts. It has to be specific to the individual project. So I don't know whether anybody particularly has something to say on that one.
Sarah, I mean, I completely kind of want to resonate what you said. I think the aspirations or ambition that government has got is to, you know, that 10 gigawatt project. I think with larger scale, you bring economies of scale, and in return, then it also helps to think about levelized cost of energy also for hydrogen. So certainly, if you want to achieve that scale and growth, I think, or bring down the cost, I think reaching economies of scale will be really important for going forward.
I don't know whether anybody else has to add on that, or whether we should to move through to some of the other questions. I think there was one here that was specific to Robert, and it says maybe Ian, so no pressure on Ian to jump in there at all. What will the DCO Accelerator pilot project look like? What is the process involved? Will this only apply to simpler DCO projects, i.e. solar, rather than more complex projects like hydrogen with CCS?
Yeah, I'm happy to pick that up. So the government they've had what was called Project Speed, what's now called the NSIP Reform Action Plan for a number of years that they've been looking at, and there are a few areas that's focused on, effectively putting more of an onus on developers. So there's more of an expectation to undertake, as part of the pre-application consultation work, some further project documents such as issues tracking, and what PINs are calling principal areas of disagreement. So I think in terms of the types of projects that this is really going to benefit in the future, it's not necessarily technology specific, but it comes down to issues. And what PINs are looking at introducing is the ability to have a shorter DCO examination and a shorter decision time frame. So at the moment, once you submit your application, you're into a 6-month examination as part of a DCO project. But for projects which meet a certain standard, quality standard, they're looking at potentially reducing that to 4 months. And the main test that PINs are looking to put in place for that is effectively what are the issues outstanding. So looking at the principal areas of disagreement with the key consultees, so local authorities and stakeholders. So if there was a hydrogen project that could demonstrate that there weren't many particular areas of contention, so for example, there's no compulsory purchase involved, it's not impossible that it would go through this route. But I think at the outset, it's more likely to apply to some of the projects that go through on a more regular basis, so stuff like solar, stuff like highways development, than hydrogen. But really, I think even if you do get into the kind of shorter examination, I think there's more of an onus on you at the pre-application stage to engage and make sure you're knocking those issues out to try and get through that quicker process.
Okay, thanks for that, Rob. Ian, I know it's sort of mentioned you. I don't really know whether you want to come in on that, but there is another question sort of just following on from what you said specifically, saying that, as you mentioned, there is a rally to reach the target by 2030. Is it really achievable regarding the policy, economy and technology? So I don't know whether you wanted to sort of maybe come in on both those things or just that specific question.
Sure. The previous question, Robert was able to answer that with some, detail there, and it's not something that's not really an area of my, expertise, the DCO accelerator thing. So happy to kind of be led by Rob's guidance in that one. As far as my own feelings about us, trying to rally to reach this target by 2030, I think we need to understand that what we're doing, particularly here, is, it's a case of from little acorns, big oak trees grow. We've got to start somewhere with some of the kind of scale of projects that we're looking at, the 5, 10, 15 megawatt projects that are kind of currently in the system and hard won, and trying to come at the other end of it and get up and running. So once we actually see some of these things, beginning to move, I really, really do feel that it will be a bit like, just, something that just gathers momentum and eventually gains, kind of critical mass. Some of the bigger projects, which will be, national infrastructure scale projects, those will start to kind of eat into those numbers and ramp it up quite a wee bit once, they get up and running, the big, huge hub type things that are planned for, quite a number of sites up and down the North Sea coast. So, we'll be heading in the right direction. Whether we actually get to the 10 gigawatt. We could argue that until the cows come home. I think the important thing in the face of what we really actually are experiencing in the world is that we need to aim for it and at least try, because there isn't a plan B.
No, I think that's a very good point. I mean, I think in terms of the ambitions for HAR2, definitely there. But, you know, following on from that, I think there's been a big push for the storage and transportation business models to come out. And we've already got market engagement, which is currently on at the moment. And obviously sort of recommend that everybody sort of takes a look at that. There's a couple of engagement programs already on at the moment that you can join. Interesting to see that it recognises the need to get those underway as soon as possible. So I think it's got 2 projects that it was going to award under the first round just to get that process moving. So and that was one of the conversations within working groups that I've been part of from the production side of it, saying it's equally as important to make sure that the structures are in place to make sure that the end user is there and is possible. But certainly the strategic decision on hydrogen blending will help with that sort of interim period as well. Although, you know, some may say that it's not an ideal solution, and if you've got your end user already as part of the arrangement, then obviously that's the most ideal situation. So I think we've got sort of another question. I think we've sort of done that one. So if I move on to the last question that's on the list here, could Ian, there you go, you're on board again. Could Ian please tell us a little about the Swedish example that was mentioned, about how to engage with local communities and bring them on board? Apologies if you're not specifically involved in this, Ian, and I've mentioned it and put you into the foray with it, but it's certainly something that was available on the website. So over to you.
That's all right, Sarah. I know I could see that you had set me up for that question there earlier by mentioning the project. People will maybe appreciate that you know, our work is part of our UK team, so that's really where my focus has been on. But we have, you know, shared a bit of information and had meetings with our colleagues from the Nordics, and it's actually quite an interesting, you know, project example about having the local community on board. It's actually a part of Sweden where it was industrialised. If memory serves me rightly, there was steel production in the area, but that's something that went by the wayside, and the community has kind of, you know, dwindled a little bit. There's no the sort of investment, and it's an area where people have gradually drifted away and moved to the big cities. That's an all too common kind of sounding story. You know, I can cite a couple of examples in steel or aluminium making in the Highlands of Scotland, where there was a similar thing once upon a time, and not that long ago, where people have drifted away and moved to the Central Belt for jobs and everything else. What the company actually did with this one was engage with the locals on the back of also looking into other opportunities for wind farms in the area. And there was a combination seen there where by developing the wind farm would actually help provide power to the electrolyser to actually start, you know, obviously start production in that area of hydrogen in some way where it could be used. So there was quite an extensive and long period of consultation with the community to actually make them fully aware of what the wider picture was going to be within this type of investment, that by utilising some of the area for a wind farm production would actually mean there would be power to support the electrolyser, which would then lead onto other things. So it was by a kind of, you know, a gradual process of getting that buy-in from different people in the community that the project was really actually very, very well supported because it was a really good way of reviving the flagging fortunes of a former industrial area that was situated out with, you know, the kind of the key built up areas within Sweden. So very similar to, you know, some of the parts of the UK, like parts of Wales, parts of Scotland, and also other parts of the North of England, particularly where former heavy industries have declined. And this was seen as a really good way to try and revive something in there.
Thank you for that, Ian. I think in light of sort of certain projects in sort of Hydrogen Village trials that haven't necessarily gone through and sort of safety concerns raised, I think, you know, there's going to be quite an impetus in the UK to try and get that message right and get it out there in a sort of positive way. You know, a lot of that will come once things are up and running, which is, you know, to the scale that it needs to be to give reassurances. But I think it's also, you know, this advancing the skills network and the need, sending that message through will actually push it through as a positive message as well. So I think the sort of push for skills is going to hopefully push that through. I wanted to just bring in Rajesh because I think we're short of time. So just in terms of investment, I'm assuming that sort of the community engagement is going to be particularly important in that. And
yeah,
really.
Definitely, and you know, and the stakeholders involved, you know, sort of range from getting people to understand the sort of hydrogen and the risks attached to it, also, and then also broader financiers and project developers also to get that comfortable. So, I think there's a role for both information education for everyone, but equal participation, I suppose, from different stakeholders to achieve the 10 gigawatt ambition that we've got.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm aware of time. I know we have got one from a message from Andrew. Maybe we can sort of look at that and respond to that more specifically, unless we feel we've already covered that. But I just wanted to end by sort of saying a big thank you to Rob, Ian and Rajesh for their contributions on this, which I think has been hopefully very useful to everybody listening. Obviously, a copy of the webinar will be sent through to everybody following this recording. And also just to sort of say thank you to Waterfront Conference Company for hosting this event. They will be also holding the next event, which will be an in-person event, which will be planning for hydrogen infrastructure. That's on Thursday, the 9th of May, and that will be held at the offices where Rob works. So that's the CMS offices in London. So obviously, if you're interested in that, please do go onto the website and book the event, as you've obviously booked this event as well. But yeah, just to say a big thank you to everybody, and obviously particularly to all of the participants who have attended. I hope this has been of use to you, and I'm sure we will all say we're happy to be contacted if there's any specific questions relating to anything that we've discussed today. So I think a big thank you to all of you, and I will say goodbye.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.